Good morning. Welcome to Sunday School. Open your Bibles, if you would, this morning again to the book of Leviticus. And I want to read chapter 1 to you and then a few verses out of chapter 6. So, very near the beginning of your Old Testament, let's look at something that God is saying to Moses in Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 1. And the Lord called unto Moses and spake unto him out of the tabernacle of the congregation, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, If any man of you bring an offering unto the Lord, ye shall bring your offering of the cattle, even of the herd and of the flock. If his offering be a burnt sacrifice of the herd, let him offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it in his own voluntary will at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord. And he shall put his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted for him to make atonement for him. And he shall kill the bullock before the Lord, and the priests, Aaron's sons, shall bring the blood and sprinkle the blood round about upon the altar that is by the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he shall flay the burnt offering and cut it into his pieces. And the sons of Aaron, the priests, shall put fire upon the altar and lay the wood in order upon the fire. And the priest, Aaron's son, shall lay the parts, the head and the fat, in order upon the wood that is on the fire, which is on the altar. But his inwards and his legs shall he wash in water, and the priest shall burn all on the altar to be a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire of a sweet savor unto the Lord. And if his offering be of the flocks, namely of the sheep or of the goats for a burnt sacrifice, he shall bring it a male without blemish. And he shall kill it on the side of the altar northward before the Lord, and the priest, Aaron's son, shall sprinkle his blood round about upon the altar. And he shall cut it into his pieces with his head and his fat, and the priest shall lay them in the order on the wood that is on the fire, which is on the altar. But he shall wash the inwards and the legs with water, and the priest shall bring it all and burn it upon the altar. It is a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire of a sweet savor unto the Lord. And if the burnt sacrifice for his offering to the Lord be of fowls, then he shall bring his offering of turtle doves or of young pigeons. And the priest shall bring it unto the altar and wring off its head and burn it on the altar, and the blood thereof shall be wrung out at the side of the altar. He shall pluck away his crop with the feathers and cast it beside the altar on the east part by the place of the ashes. And he shall cleave it with the wings thereof, but shall not divide it asunder, and the priest shall burn it upon the altar, upon the wood that is upon the fire. It is a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire of a sweet savor unto the Lord. Now turn forward a few pages to chapter 6, and I want to look at verses 8 through 13. So Leviticus chapter 6, verses 8 through 13. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Command Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the law of the burnt offering. It is the burnt offering because of the burning upon the altar all night unto the morning. And the fire of the altar shall be burning in it. And the priest shall put on his linen garment, and his linen breeches shall he put upon his flesh. And take up the ashes which the fire hath consumed with the burnt offering on the altar, and he shall put them beside the altar. And he shall put off his garments, and put on the other garments, and carry forth the ashes without the camp unto a clean place. And the fire upon the altar shall be burning in it, it shall not be put out, and the priest shall burn wood on it every morning, and lay the burnt offering in order upon it, and he shall burn thereon the fat of the peace offerings. The fire shall ever be burning upon the altar, it shall never go out. Okay. Well, what does that have to do with anything in 2025? This is talking about an altar, instructions by God, 1,500 years, my Bible says, approximately 1,490 years before Christ. We're 15, that's 1,500 years before Christ. We're 2,000 years on the other side of Christ. So 3,500 years ago, God gave these instructions to Moses. What in the world does that have to do with anything today? Well, I think it has something important that it says to us today. And that's what I want us to think upon these next few minutes. So if we look at what the purpose and the symbolism of the burnt offering is in the Old Testament, that's, I think, the key to understanding how this applies to us today. And if we look at the responsibilities of the priests in maintaining the burnt offering and how the practices point toward deeper spiritual truths in the New Testament, then I think we can come to an understanding of why this is important to have read this in Leviticus. So let me start with a question here. What comes to mind when you think of offerings or sacrifices? It could be financial. It could be sacrifice of time, sacrifice of something you want, something you need, but you had to sacrifice. You had to go without something for a while, probably against your will. What about an offering? Well, we tend to think of an offering as when you take up the offering at church as putting money in an offering plate. So we think of it in terms of financial things. Offerings and sacrifices in the Old Testament meant animals. And a lot of times those are animals that you owned, you fed them, you cared for them, you were to get meat from those. So it truly was a sacrifice. And it was kind of like a financial sacrifice in terms of cash that we would do today. But the book of Leviticus outlines the system of worship that God gave to Israel. This is how you worship me, is what God is saying. And notice if you heard while I was reading, or if you read it with your own eyes, that sacrifice had to be without blemish. So God in the Old Testament was emphasizing holiness and atonement for sin through a perfect sacrifice. Well, what is that? In the New Testament, that's Jesus Christ. We're coming to Easter here in another 4 or 5 weeks. And that's what Easter is all about, the perfect sacrifice that was made for us. And then once that is made for us, and when we understand what that means, then we have to live a life that is responsive to that. So if we look at the burnt offering in the first, in chapter 1, there's a lot of discussion there about the burnt offering. So, but this is all procedural. The passage is describing the procedures for prescribing burnt offerings from the herd, whether it's cattle or whether it's sheep or whether it's birds. And if birds would be for people that were of lesser means, didn't have as much. And so they could offer birds. But there's some keys to this. If you notice, it was a voluntary offering. A burnt offering was brought willingly as an act of devotion or atonement. It symbolized total surrender to God. You know, in the New Testament, when we talk about total surrender to God, that's when we talk about entire sanctification that comes after salvation. It could come simultaneous with salvation, but for most people it does not. Where after a person's saved, there's something, a pull on their heart that they come to the realization that I need to live a holy life. And I need God, you to cleanse me of whatever desire I might have to not live a holy life. Take that away from me. And that's total surrender to God at that point. Well, we see that here in Leviticus. Also, the significance of blood. You know, there's great description in chapter 1 here in Leviticus of the blood on the altar. You might think, well, that was gory. Why'd they put that in there? But that's very significant because the blood of the animal represents life. You don't have life if you don't have blood. And it's necessary for atonement. And that's a key point when we come to Easter to think about Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. Jesus' love would not save anybody from hell. He had to give of himself sacrificially, and that meant blood. It's only through the blood of Christ that we are saved. And that is what God is emphasizing to Moses here in Leviticus. Blood is necessary for life. It's necessary for second life. It's necessary for the atonement. And then also there's this idea of this notion of complete consumption. The offering was entirely burned. It's gone. If you notice, go back and read that. It's completely consumed. That symbolizes total dedication to God. We're back then again to living a holy life for God. So how does this idea of total surrender resonate with our relationship with God today? Are we each totally surrendered to the will of Christ? That's his will for us, that we would be sanctified. It says that in the New Testament. So think about that. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 6 and look at those few verses that I talked about in Leviticus 6, verses 8 through 13. And that is talking about priestly duties. So we saw the sacrifice itself in chapter 1, the discussion there. Now it focuses on priestly duties. What's the priest's role in keeping the burnt offering continually burning on the altar? Now, how do I keep that fire burning in my heart, my passion for God? A number of years ago, in the Church of the Nazarene, an individual wrote a song for camp meeting, which we basically don't have anymore. And it was, I don't want to lose the fire. And I think that in the church there in the pew someplace, there's a sheet, and perhaps, Gene, you can find that there. You know what I'm talking about. I don't want to lose the fire. If you can find that, read it. And maybe pluck it out on the piano and sing, or on the guitar and sing that. But that's what the priest's duties were in chapter 6. Keep that fire burning. Keep that sacrifice burning, that continuous fire. The fire on the altar was to never go out, because that symbolized God's presence and the ongoing nature of worship. And so the priests are responsible for maintaining the fire and handling the ashes. Well, what's the connection to Christ with that? Well, the priests interceded on behalf of the people, and that was a role that was ultimately fulfilled in the New Testament by Jesus as our high priest. So why is consistency in worship important in our spiritual lives? Oh, I'd love to see the church in Boone filled on a weekly basis. That town is big enough to certainly have not just one Nazarene church, but multiple Nazarene churches, and have them all filled with the message of holiness. But I go back to my question here. Why is consistency in worship important in our spiritual lives? Some people say, well, I go to church religiously every Christmas and Easter. That's not really the consistency that God is wanting. If we have a hunger in our heart for holiness, we're going to want to be with God's people. Now, true, God is with us wherever we are. But in corporate worship, you're with other believers and you encourage and strengthen each other when you're together. We need that consistency in our life. There's plenty of other things in the world to draw us away. But the consistency with God and reading his word and meeting with other followers is very important. Well, for them, the burnt offerings highlighted the need for atonement and a mediator between God and humanity. For us now, these offerings foreshadowed, we can see the foreshadowing here in Leviticus of Jesus's ultimate sacrifice for sin. Sometimes read Hebrews 10, the first 10 verses of Hebrews chapter 10, and you'll see that. So are we offering our lives fully to God as a living sacrifice? Read Romans 12:1 sometime. And that's what Paul is talking about there, being a living sacrifice for God. So go back and look at this. List what part of each burnt offering, such as the fire, the blood, the whole consumption, what could that symbolize concerning our walk with God today? And think about areas in your life that you want to dedicate fully to God. So those burnt offerings in Leviticus, this is why the Old Testament is important. Those were a foreshadowing of what Christ would do for us on the cross, completely giving himself for our sins, I should say, plural. There's a reason for that. But I think in reading this, it reminds us of God's holiness and his invitation for us to draw near through faith in Jesus. So a lot of good stuff here in the Old Testament in Leviticus. I know it may seem sometimes, well, why should we read such things as Exodus, Leviticus? But really, the Bible is a consistent theme all the way through every single book from Genesis to Revelation. And Christ is in there. And that's what this passage is about in Leviticus. So walk your walk as close to God as you can until I see you again. May God be with you in the service to follow. Amen.